Thank you for your time in joining us today. My name is Roger Peacock from Velocity, and I'm joined by one of our technical specialists, Johan Jacobs, who's going to take you through the actual demo today. We're going to start really just with a little bit of an introduction as to what RPA is and how we see RPA in the marketplace. And then we're going to come on to take you through a fairly sort of simple and short demo of how we've used RPA in what we see is probably quite a unique little scenario that came to us from one of our clients recently. So just to start things off then, what is RPA? Well, for those that sort of haven't been introduced to RPA, it's essentially a software-driven process automation. And what we mean by that is that we're using software and we're using software robotics to emulate and replace the human actions that a human operative would undertake. So it basically mirrors your existing processes, but it automates all of those process steps by mirroring what a human might do in terms of keystrokes, mouse movements, things like logging into solutions, logging into websites, and so on and so forth. Completely scalable, so we can have a robot to do one process, we can have a robot to do multiple processes, and obviously if you're running out of time or you're pushing enough volume through a single robot, you can augment that with additional robots. So, you know, we can have as many processes, as many robots as is needed by the organization. And the nice thing is that, you know, that's acting as the hands and eyes of the human, but not the brain. You know, you're still in complete control of what the robot does by the training that you give the robot and how you configure that robot, and that's one of the things that we'll look at briefly today. Because we're using robotics, because we're training that through software, obviously what it does do is it mitigates any human error that we tend to find in things like data transfer or the tasks that somebody's doing. When you train a software robot or a digital worker, essentially that robot will do the same thing time and time again in exactly the same way, follow exactly the same process. Whereas what you often tend to find with human operatives is that they may look to find shortcuts or may think they have a better way of following a process. And if you're in a compliant or regulatory environment, it's, you know, good to have that audit trail to say, no, actually the process has been done exactly the same way and this is the process that's been followed. So say it mitigates you know, deviation from those processes, but also it mitigates the error that's sometimes caused by humans copying data or cutting and pasting data, perhaps missing digits off invoice numbers or codes or anything of that nature. And then finally, you know, as a robot, the nice thing is that it's working for you 24/7, 365 days a year. And it's not taking any coffee breaks or getting distracted by anything else. So in terms of efficiencies and in terms of the amount you can process through a robot, it tends to be far higher volumes than you would normally push through a human operative who might be working 8 or 9 hours a day. So moving on then to the process that we'd like to show you today, or the scenario that we'd like to go through to you today. As I say, this has come from one of our clients recently, and we saw it as being something a little bit unique, if you like, and something outside of what you would normally tend to associate with an RPA process or a digital worker. Essentially, they're in the marketing sphere, and 72% of marketers now use video content to promote their business and services. And one of the challenges is that they'll use those video content across multiple platforms, whether that's YouTube, Vimeo, LinkedIn, perhaps Twitter, Facebook, depending on where your market is. And of course, for each of those different platforms, you need a different format of video, or you might want to pull the audio out from a video to use for a podcast. So generally what we're finding is that marketing organizations, and this one in particular, want to use one single version of content, but actually multi-purpose that for different platforms. The other aspect is that, you know, the majority of marketers now publish multiple times per day and per week. So, you know, they're pushing quite a high level or high volume of content through these channels. And of course that becomes time consuming. You know, there's one thing recording the actual content, but then when you've got to think about uploading the content, perhaps editing it for different platforms, looking at how you're going to publish that video content on different platforms and the different formats that you need for that, it can become hugely time consuming and a hugely onerous task. So what we were challenged with was looking at a scenario that would actually automate this process for that company. So to that extent, what we've got for you is a demonstration that enables a user to upload video content to a shared folder. The robot will actually monitor that shared folder and pick up any new video content. It will merge that video content together. So in the scenario that we've got and the demo that we've got, you'll see 3 pieces of video content that needs to be merged together to form one video. And what we've also done is we've created an intro video and an outro video so that any content is actually preceded and succeeded by branded content, really just as an introductory slide and an exit slide, as it were, to all that content. So the nice thing about that is that no matter what content you upload, you get that branded theming to anything that is then uploaded to the media platforms. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to my colleague Johan, who's going to take you through that demo.
All right, thanks Roger. So basically here's our shared folder where we have our intro video and exit video, as well as the video content that the user would like to have as part of this edit and rendering. And then we can jump over to our robot sequence. So here we can, if I go to the top, here we have all the steps that we've programmed our robot for this sequence. It will be rendering out to our YouTube channel. I'll bring the videos all together and rendering out to our video channel, or YouTube channel, sorry. So here we can see all the different steps that we've programmed the robot to do. It's opening up Camtasia and then importing the video content and so forth. So that's the robot sequence. So I'll start it off, then we'll see it in action. So it will first open the Camtasia Studio. We then go and import the media. So it will first go and bring in the intro. We'll then go over and get the other media content that the user provided. And then the exit video. Once it's done that, it will bring it into the timeline for us. We'll then go over and edit the audio, do noise reduction there. And then we'll go and then render it to our YouTube channel, put in the information around the video for us, and then render it out. So this will take a little bit of time to render. But like we said, potentially, this is not one of the sequences, but you can potentially build out all the rest of the sequences that will render to the different channels and the different formats as well.
Yeah, so as you say, what we're doing here is rendering this video directly for YouTube in terms of its clarity, in terms of the video size, in terms of the noise reduction on the audio. But equally, we could have a further step for the robot to then say, okay, take that same content and render that separately for Facebook, for example, or for LinkedIn, or actually extract all the audio so that we can use that perhaps for a podcast or something of that nature. And then we can take that content and save that in a shared folder for somebody to use at a later date, or upload directly to streaming media like YouTube.
Alright, so now it automatically opens the link for us, and the robot will now grab the link for us and it will send it out as an email to our inbox, so we'll be able to then forward that on to whoever we need to send the link on. So if I go to my inbox, I'll see that I've received the video link from the robot sent through, and I can forward this on to whoever I would like to forward it on to. So yeah, I think that completes the practical demonstration. So I'll hand back to you, Roger.
Okay, so as Johan says, so what we've done there is obviously rendered that or compiled the video, added all of the scenes together, put the intro and exit slides in, and then rendered that specifically for YouTube, and provided the user with a link that they can then share to any of their audience, basically, to then go on and view that through YouTube or Facebook or whichever media you've used. So you know, the sort of rationale behind this with our client was that the manual process for them was hugely time consuming. I mean, obviously the demo that we've taken you through there was fairly short, but if you consider that, you know, that video could be an awful lot longer and take a lot longer time to render, and you might take some more diligence in terms of how that's actually being rendered and gone through the noise reduction, etc. It does become hugely time consuming, especially when you might have 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 of those to do per day. So very repetitive and very monotonous from that perspective. The other aspect is that obviously you're requiring the user to have knowledge of Camtasia and also licenses for Camtasia. So if that's spread across a number of users doing that task, then obviously that increases costs from a licensing point of view. Whereas if we look at that being done through a digital worker or a robot, what we find is that obviously you've got a single license because you're using one point of entry for the editing software. We can quickly upload video content on demand because we can actually just deploy that robot to do it as soon as the video is ready. We're not waiting for a human to finish doing something else or to have time to actually compile and render the video. We ensure that you've got the consistency of that on-brand messaging, so from the intro and the exit slide, so you've got that branded theme to bookmark the video content. And of course we're reducing the resource that's required to upload those videos, so we're no longer using a human to do that, which frees up somebody's time to go off and do something more strategic or of greater value rather than something that's fairly mundane and you know, transactional. And of course we've removed the task and time to upload the video content in exactly the same way. So again, it goes straight out to the streaming channel. Again, not having to wait for a human or not relying on a human to actually do that for you. So it all happens automatically. So really, just to summarize then, you know, the use of bots, why we might look to use robotics within an organization and what it means to an organization. I think, you know, for us, the best way to look at robotics is as a virtual workforce. You'll have heard the term that we used earlier on, a digital worker. And we sometimes prefer that to sort of RPA, if you like, because we think it encapsulates exactly what robotic process automation is all about. It's about deploying a virtual workforce or a digital workforce, digital workers to actually do tasks for you. It transforms those mundane and transactional tasks in terms of, you know, you're no longer having to have humans actually do those. And of course it is working 24/7, 365 days a year. So, you know, you can push as much volume through those digital workers as you need to. It's very rapid to implement. So a solution of this nature realistically, you know, takes probably a day and a half to 2 days in terms of a POC. But for a hardened productionized solution, you might be looking at something closer to sort of 10 or 12 days to actually push something out to a live environment. Again, we've talked about increased accuracy. So from a robotics point of view, the fact that we're not using humans means that we can guarantee the accuracy of data transfers. Obviously, it frees up users' time to go off and do something, as we say, more strategic and of greater value to the organization. And that tends to lead to greater job satisfaction for employees, greater staff retention. You know, they're no longer being in a position where they're having to do these mundane, transactional, data-driven, high-volume tasks. They can involve themselves in something more innovative for the business. Obviously we're increasing productivity and in some areas customer satisfaction, because driving processes through a digital worker means generally we can do things far quicker, which means we can get responses to customers quite often in a far quicker fashion and a far quicker manner than you might if you were relying on a human operative. Again, because we can push as much volume through robotics, and because they're completely scalable, it does support people's and businesses' growth plans, because again, you're not reliant on FTE or headcount to actually achieve that growth. And hugely tangible, so we can actually tie back a process to an ROI or a business case and accurately measure the savings that you're making by freeing people up or by not having to employ additional people to scale processes. And as we've already said, robotics, digital workforces, virtual workforces are completely scalable. So moving on then, just to talk through a little bit about how we go about things, and if RPA, if robotics and digital workers is something that's of interest to your business, the way that we go about things is very step-by-step fashion. We start with a discovery and a design session, so that's really all around understanding you as a business and your business processes, choosing a process that is suitable for automation, and something that's going to add value to the business and be demonstrable within the business. And then we move to, the slide says demo, but essentially really we're talking there about a POC, a proof of concept, a proof of value, or some form of pilot, really just to say, having looked at that process, having looked at how we might automate it, this is the way that it would actually work with a digital worker. And assuming that fits with the business, and provides the benefits anticipated, then we move to deploy that into a live environment. And then it's really a question of saying, okay, how do we then scale that throughout the organization and push more and more processes through that? So that's really around building out a center of excellence within your organization and pulling people together from different departments to say, how can we leverage robotic process automation and robotics through the business and push more and more processes through that digital medium. So that's hopefully giving you a little bit of an insight into RPA, fairly short and succinct, but as I say, really just as an introduction and bringing something to the fore that we saw as fairly unique in terms of a scenario or a business case for RPA. If you do have any questions, then please drop those into the questions box in the GoToWebinar dashboard. We've got a couple that have been raised already, so I'll just start off by running through those. The first one was, well, we've touched on a little bit already, and that was the typical time to configure a robot. I think really if we go back to the robotics screen, you can see, so how we go about developing that robot, and it is really very simple in terms of we have the assets on the left hand side of the screen, so we can pull things into that in terms of how you might want to log into a website, or how you might want to have a mouse click as Johan's showing you now, how you might want to use OCR components, and really it's a question then of just dragging those into the central screen and building up that flow of tasks and that overall process for the robot. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see all of the logic around each of those component parts and each of those tasks and the rules, and that's where you would perhaps put your username and the password if it is logging into a website, or in this case, as you saw with Camtasia. And so building out robots, it is something that can be done relatively quickly. There's no code being written in the background here, and equally we have a number of ways of actually training a robot, so you can build up that task manually, but equally we can click on the recording button at the top and it will follow the steps that a user is taking and replicate those exactly. Now, clearly there's a little bit of refinement there, and we mentioned earlier that there's one thing to build out a very quick demo that you've seen today, but it's another thing to put that into a hardened, productionized solution. But generally speaking, we're seeing RPA processes or robotics being built out in a small number of days. So projects for us tend to be in the order of perhaps 20 to 40 days as a maximum when you consider the initial discovery, design, the development, the testing, the deploying, and so on and so forth. The other nice thing with the solution that we're using, which is the UiPath platform, is that it's very easy for us to enable our customers to pick this up as a technology that they can deploy internally. So with most of our clients, we're seeing an internal team of business users, or well, mix of business users and IT is probably the best way of putting it, actually configuring these robots for the processes that they're looking to develop, and giving them a sandbox environment to sort of play around with and just make sure things are working correctly before rolling those out into production. So yeah, a bit difficult to say, typical times, but hopefully that gives you some sort of flavor as to the speed and how rapidly we can actually deploy solutions. So next question, can it be integrated with other business process applications? Absolutely. We can integrate UiPath and digital workers with all forms of business solutions, either via API or actually by going into the application and logging in as a user and actually writing data directly into that application. So, you might be looking at sort of something along the lines of maybe a SharePoint backend or a Dynamics backend. Again, we can do that through APIs, or equally we can actually log in as a user and write data directly to those records. And in some instances, projects demand a mixture of the two when you're integrating with multiple applications. Hopefully that answers the question, but obviously if you'd like to understand more, then drop that in the question box and we'll pick that up again for you. But yes, we can integrate to multiple applications. So the other question that we've got then, would you run this process attended or unattended? Well, that's a great question, and really just for anybody who perhaps doesn't understand, generally with digital workers and RPA, you get two varieties. One is attended and one is unattended. An unattended robot generally runs in the background, so you wouldn't see that happening. It would be managed by a server element that's actually directing that robot what to do and when to do it. But it does things overnight, so it might do batch processing. In the example of the video compiling and uploading that we showed you a little bit earlier on, you might have an unattended robot sitting in the background that picks all those videos up, not necessarily in real time, but might have a particular time that it's going to do all that rendering overnight so that the videos are ready and uploaded first thing in the morning, for example. An attended robot, by comparison, is something that a user will generally kick off to do a particular task, and is really more of a virtual assistant in that sense. So in this instance, we've used an attended robot because we've triggered that and kicked that off to go and render and upload the videos directly. So that's a manual trigger rather than an unattended robot looking and waiting for the video to land in the inbox. So would we run this process attended or unattended in the real world? Probably in the real world we would look to do that unattended, I would suggest, and either do that real time where the robot is monitoring an inbox waiting for something to land, or sorry, monitoring a folder and waiting for something to land, and then in real time rendering and uploading that to the channel. Or you may say, again, unattended, I'll do that overnight and have those videos uploaded first thing in the morning. And of course, once the robot's not doing that task, it's free to go and do something different. So you could have that robot rendering videos between, I don't know, 12 and 4 in the morning, for example, but thereafter it might be doing another task completely. It might be something to do with your finance department. It could be invoice processing or looking at accounts payable or credit control or any other process that you wanted it to. So those are the two varieties that we tend to see in robotics. Which is right for this solution, is questionable and something we would look at in detail with the client, but our suggestion would be to run this unattended. So final question we've got then from the audience is, do you need development skills in order to configure robots? The answer is generally no. Clearly it helps if you've got a little bit of an understanding of code and developing things, but generally speaking not, as you've seen from the UiPath Studio. It's fairly straightforward. It's pretty much drag and drop. It's what we would term to be a visual modeling tool. And the nice thing again with UiPath is that you do have that sandbox environment, that development environment to sort of trial things out before you actually go live with a solution. So you can very quickly build something out, trial it, see if it works. If it does, great. If it doesn't, then just go back in and refine it and tweak it until you get to something that does work. In some instances with very complicated process automations, there might be a requirement to have a small element of code running alongside the robot or augmenting what the robot's doing, in which case you would need some capabilities, but generally that's not the case. Okay, so that seems to have wound up most of the questions that we've got. Hopefully everybody's found that useful. We'll just drop back to the slides and leave you on that final slide, which has got my contact details on should you need it. As I say, my name's Roger Peacock. You can reach me at roger@velocity-it.com if you've got any questions or if we can be of any assistance. Once again, thank you very much for your time in joining us today. And please feel free to get in touch if you've got any other questions or if we can help. Thank you.